For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
Madam Speaker, I ask to address the House for 1 minute for the purposes of inquiring about next week's schedule.
Without objection. Gentleman's recognized.
I thank the Speaker, and I yield to the gentleman from Maryland, the Majority Leader, for the purpose of announcing next week's schedule.
I thank the Republican whip for yielding. On Monday, the House will meet at 12:30 p.m. for morning hour debate and 2 p.m. for legislative business, with votes postponed until 6:30 p.m. On Tuesday, the House will meet at 10:30 for morning hour debate and 12 p.m. for legislative business. And on Wednesday and Thursday, the House will meet at 10 a.m. for legislative business. On Friday, no votes are expected in the House. We will consider several bills under suspension of the rules, including the very important H.R. 3393, Improper Payments Elimination and Recovery Act of 2009, introduced by Representative Murphy, Patrick Murphy of Pennsylvania. The complete list of suspension bills will be announced by the close of business tomorrow. In addition, we will consider H.R. 5013, Implementing Management for Performance and Related Reforms to Obtain Value in Every Acquisition Act of 2010, and H.R. 2499, the Puerto Rico Democracy Act of 2009. Yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. Madam Speaker, the House will be in session for 5 more weeks prior to the Memorial Day district work period, and I'd like to inquire of the gentleman what legislation he expects the House to consider prior to that district work period, in addition to the items he just mentioned for next week, and I yield.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. As the gentleman knows, our number one priority has been and continues to be the progress on creation of jobs. The last month's report was a positive report. We gained 162,000 jobs, and the economy is showing signs of very substantial improvement as a result of the Recovery Act and other actions that we've taken to get Americans back to work. So that will continue to be our focus. Having said that, we also have passed already the HIRE Act, which we think will have a very substantial positive effect, which includes payroll tax forgiveness for the hiring of new employees who have been unemployed for some period of time, and if they're kept on for 52 weeks, there will be a $1,000 additional payment, which we hope will encourage employers to hire new people. In addition, in that bill, we gave an extension of the Highway Trust Fund to allow for continued and increased investment in infrastructure, and the Build America bonds legislation, and as well as giving a boost to small business growth in terms of expensing. In addition, the House will House pass the Small Business and Infrastructure Jobs Act, which is pending in the Senate. We hope that is coming back to us. This work period, we'd like to build on a record of job-creating legislation with additional relief to small businesses. The President has proposed, as the gentleman knows, the Small Business Lending Fund that would take $30 billion of funds, which was obviously designed to try to get our economy moving again, provide capital infusion to local banks and assets of $10 billion or less to incentivize small business lending. Also, we hope to complete action with the Senate on long-term extension of unemployment insurance and COBRA benefits and tax extenders for businesses large and small. Some of them, obviously, those pieces of legislation have passed the House. I expect the House will also take action this work period on the Competes Act, which is relatively non-controversial but invests in growing our economy, particularly in science, technology, innovations, math, and science. Other items on our agenda for this work period is the budget resolution, defense acquisition reform, which I announced we would do next week, defense authorization reform, Afghanistan, Pakistan supplemental, Haiti supplemental, and of course the Iran sanctions conference report, which I hope to have done, and the resolution that you and I just voted for, the motion to instruct, urged that be reported back by the Memorial Day break. Yield back.
I thank the gentleman, and I would say to the gentleman, I am heartened to hear about his continued insistence that this body focus on the number one priority of the American people, and that is getting this economy going again and getting Americans back to work. And Madam Speaker, I would say that most Americans agree that what we ought to be doing is containing and limiting government spending. Many of the programs that the gentleman just pointed out indicate that we perhaps are going to head down the same road, keep heading down the same road that we have been in order to try and create an environment for jobs. I would say to the gentleman, although that there was some job growth last month, he himself, I think, would admit that that's just not enough. And in fact, if we were to look back at the times of very high employment in prior years, there is probably a need for over 400,000 jobs to be created each month for us over a period of several years in order to accommodate for the growth in population as well as to return us to that kind of low unemployment. We got a lot of work to do, in other words, Madam Speaker, and I know the gentleman knows that. And I think it is fair to say that, in fact, we need to create 434,000 jobs per month for 2 years to make up for the job losses that we have experienced. That is going to take some significant commitment on the part of this Congress to stop the government spending and, frankly, to lower taxes on small business. And as the gentleman knows, his constituents, just like mine, everyone I talk to knows someone out of work. And it is high time for us to focus on small business, and that is to provide the tax relief for small business and to stop the government programs of spending. And I would hope that the gentleman can commit to trying to change the route that we have taken to finally begin to grow this economy again. With that, Madam Speaker, I would ask the gentleman
Before the gentleman asks another question, would you yield so I might comment
Sure.
on the comments that the gentleman made? The gentleman indicates that we want to stop spending. Every economist from his side of the aisle to our side of the aisle said that if we did not spend money last year, that we wouldn't have grown the economy. In fact, Ben Bernanke, the Republican-appointed chairman of the Federal Reserve by President Bush, and Secretary Paulson, all said, you better invest or you're going to go into a depression, not a recession. And the gentleman talks about job creation. It's very interesting because, generally speaking, he wants to return to the policies of the Bush administration. And the Bush administration, of course, was the worst job-performing administration since Herbert Hoover. I know the gentleman knows that because those statistics are pretty clear. It created 19,400 jobs per month. You talk about 400 and some odd thousand jobs. I agree with the gentleman. We need to create that level if we're going to get the jobs that your economic program lost. 19,400 jobs. You need 100,000 to stay even. That was the average over 96 months of the policies that were pursued during the Bush administration that my friend supported. Very frankly, if you will remember, during the Clinton administration, in an economic program that your party didn't support to a person, everyone voted against it, we created 216,000 jobs per month. Now, there's no secret as to where those jobs were lost. If you create 10% of the number of jobs you need to stay even, or you're going to go behind, and we have a real deficit. The CBO says that the program that was adopted, that of course your party opposed, created 2 million new jobs, or retained jobs, in our economy. Over the last 5 months, we've had a net positive growth in jobs. We grew 162,000 jobs last month. The gentleman's absolutely correct. Not nearly enough, but much better than the 779,000 jobs that were lost in the last month of the Bush administration, or the average 726,000 jobs that were lost of the Bush administration. We now have we're in the pluses. We're starting to grow. We need to do much, much more. And that's why I responded to the gentleman when he asked me what we were going to do. We're going to continue to focus on bringing jobs back to America and to our people. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. And, Madam Speaker, I would say this. Always, the gentleman likes to talk about the prior administration, and I would just like to point out that during the prior administration, the last 2 years of that, his party was in control of Congress, and certainly, if we look at the numbers, did contribute to some of the problem that we've got today.
On that issue?
No, I'm not ready to yield yet, Madam Speaker, and I would say there's plenty of blame to go around. But what we're trying to do is to learn from perhaps mistakes having taken place and go forward in a constructive manner. And it's my sense, Madam Speaker, that this nation is at a crossroads. We have serious challenges facing this country. And last Thursday was Congress's deadline for passing a budget. And it is my strong belief that we must act, and the gentleman indicates that we are going to act. But because of the critical nature of the challenges that we face, Madam Speaker, I believe that we've got 3 reasons to act swiftly and properly in passing a budget, because it is at the heart of the lack of confidence of what the American people feel towards this body. And if we can rebuild that confidence, somehow we can see a return to growth in this economy so people can get back to work. First, Madam Speaker, since 1974 Budget Act passed, the House has never failed to pass a budget resolution. American families and small businesses are not given the luxury budget somehow because maybe it's too difficult, and neither should we. And the gentleman in his own words has said before that it is difficult to pass budgets in election years because the budgets reflect what the fiscal status is. And again, Madam Speaker, I'd point out, never since the passage of the Budget Act in 1974 has this House failed to pass a budget resolution. Secondly, Madam Speaker, as to the urgency for this body to act in this critical time, CBO Director Doug Elmendorf recently remarked that the nation's fiscal path is unsustainable, and without a more aggressive approach to spending than the President took, the debt in his budget proposal, the debt will rise from currently 53% of GDP to 90% of GDP at the end of the decade. We all know, Madam Speaker, that is unacceptable. And finally, I'd say to the gentleman, Madam Speaker, the President in his remarks consistently refers to pending tax increases as the expiration of the Bush tax cut. And Madam Speaker, I'd say the American people believe that erasing a tax cut is a tax increase. This Congress has a responsibility to the people that we represent to inform them, the families, the small businesses, of its intention on whether we're going to increase taxes on the small business people and working families of this country. So I'd ask the gentleman if he could give us some sense of when we could expect this body to act on a budget. And I yield.
Well, I hope that we act on a budget certainly before the end of this work period. I think it's important to pass a budget. I've said that. I'm working towards that end.
I thank the gentleman for that and for his commitment to ensure that we right the ship, so to speak, and stop the spending.
Will the gentleman yield on that?
I yield.
Yeah, the gentleman would like to pretend that the Bush administration didn't exist. He doesn't like to look back. He doesn't like history. He doesn't like to learn from our mistakes. I notice he doesn't outline the mistakes that the Bush administration made and that he made in supporting the Bush economic policies, but presumably he believes they existed, which led to such a disastrous performance of our economy. The turning of a $5.6 trillion surplus that the Bush administration inherited, which allowed it to do some of the things that it did without paying for them because they inherited surpluses. Unfortunately, they left a $5 trillion deficit to this administration. They left a deep, deep, deep hole that we've been trying to dig out without much help, frankly, from your side of the aisle, I will tell my friend. And we are getting out of that hole. Almost every indicator indicates that. including a growth in jobs, not nearly to where people are feeling it. So we need to make sure that we continue to create jobs and create an economy that is working much better than it worked during the Bush administration. The gentleman mentions that we were in charge of Congress in 07. Yes, in 06, the American public said, we don't like the policies that the Bush administration, the Republicans, Congress are pursuing. We want to change. We did change. But the gentleman well knows that no veto of President Bush was overwritten to change the economic policies you were pursuing, period. We couldn't do it until such time as January of 09 occurred. When it occurred, unfortunately and tragically for the American people and the millions, 8 million to be plus to be exact, who lost their jobs, a financial system that was suffering from egregious regulatory neglect and had, as a result, put many taxpayers, millions of taxpayers, to the responsibility of trying to stabilize the ship of state. Now, we've done that, and the good news is that money is being paid back. The good news is that in terms of the bill that you and I both supported, but 2/3 of your party did not, we did stabilize, at the request of the Bush administration, the financial community. So when the gentleman says that we need to grow jobs, we do. But very frankly, if the gentleman is proposing the same policies that were pursued for 8 years under the Bush administration, then that won't get it and didn't get it, and that's why it's important to learn, not to place blame, but to learn, as I said the other day, from those failures and not repeat them, to invest in the growth of our economy.
I would thank the gentleman, Madam Speaker, and I'd say back, if he is so intent on comparing the budgets and the outlook under the Bush administration to this one, I would say this: if we compare the 2011 budgets of President Bush and President Obama, President Bush's outlook and budget for this year was $2.9 trillion. The 2011 budget of this president is $3.6 trillion. We could simply cut the deficit by 50% if we just lived within President Bush's 2011 budget. And Madam Speaker, I would say to the gentleman, if you cut out all of the emergency spending caused by the recession,
the gentleman yield on
I'll yield in a minute. If you cut out all the emergency spending caused by the recession and just look at discretionary spending, since Congress votes on that every year, President Obama will increase discretionary spending by $319 billion over President Bush's budget for 2011. And so, Madam Speaker, I would say, again, we've got to do better. The American people are waiting for this body to step up in a responsible way to stop the spending, which brings on the need for yet even more debt, which ultimately will lead to higher taxes, despite what the gentleman says there's been enough tax relief, and get back to a fiscal path that makes sense so we can see small business grow again. And I yield.
First of all, the gentleman does this often. I never said there'd been enough tax relief. What you just said, I said. I never said that. Nobody heard me say that.
Well, I thought that the gentleman, Madam Speaker, had said that there's been so much tax relief under the current administration that it seems that all we need to do is keep spending. And
I think you anticipated, if I can, I think you anticipated what the facts are, as you know. I didn't say that, but you anticipated, I might say, 95% of the American public, 95% of the American working people got a tax cut, as you recall, in the legislation that you voted against. $288 billion in tax relief. That went into the pockets of Americans, helped them get through some very, very tough times, which we inherited, did not create, which we inherited, and moving forward. With respect to the tax cuts or tax increases that you referred to earlier, they're going into effect because of a policy that I voted against, but you voted, I think you voted for. You were here in 01 and 03. And why did you do that? You talk about budgeting. You did it because you couldn't conform to your budget requirements. So what you simply did is you did the artifice, with all due respect, to saying, well, they'll expire in 2010. So what is projected to happen in 2010 is a direct result of the budget and the policies that you promoted and voted for, I tell my friend.
I would say to the gentleman again, if he's so intent on comparing the two, let's go just back to the Bush budget, which would allow us to cut the deficit by 50%. If he's so intent on saying how bad things were, let's stop the spending. But I would say to the gentleman, as far as tax relief is concerned, that tax relief to 95% of the public, 25% of the tax relief went to entities and individuals that don't even pay taxes. Now, in the minds of most Americans, that's not a tax cut, that's a handout. And that's why we've got to start getting back to basics, Madam Speaker, and insist that the kinds of things that we do here are actually constructive to job creation, because that's what we need to be about. Now, we can go through the litany of things in this President's budget and what the majority has done over its term in office this session to demonstrate taxes have gone up significantly over this period. It is time to stop taxing, stop spending, and stop borrowing. So, Madam Speaker, I thank the gentleman for...
Will the gentleman yield on that?
I yield.
When you say taxes have gone up in this period, what period are you referring to?
Well, I can say this year. This year, Madam Speaker, taxes have increased $670 billion, $316 billion of which comes at the expense of the middle class, breaking the President's promise.
And what were those taxes?
Madam Speaker, I would say if you look at the health care bill that was just passed.
The health care bill has not gone into effect. You're saying this year taxes have been increased.
The health care bill that has just passed, as long as this economy and the players in this economy understand that, actions are being taken now to facilitate adopting to a very high tax environment. Now, if the gentleman wants to join us, if he wants to join us in sending the signal to the public that we're not going to continue business as usual, then let's step up. Send the signal. We're not going to allow taxes to increase any further, and that starts with differing from the President's budget, which calls for $2 trillion of tax hikes over the next 10 years. So I'll say to the gentleman, you can say all day long that you have sat here and provided enough middle-class tax relief. It's just not true. The public doesn't understand that. The public sees Washington spending money in unprecedented ways and having to borrow to pay for that, and ultimately people understand that it is about raising their taxes, reducing their take-home pay in order to pay for that.
Will the gentleman yield?
I yield.
The gentleman perhaps believes if he says it enough, that I said there's been enough tax relief, maybe people will believe it. I have never said that on this floor or any other place. So I wish the gentleman would stop mischaracterizing what I say. Now, very frankly, what I have said is the policies we pursued were not working demonstrably when we took over the presidency of the United States and could change policy, which we did. We changed policy consistent with, frankly, what Senator McCain said ought to be done during the course of the election. Not the same way, but that we had to invest in our economy. Mark Zandi, Senator McCain's economic advisor, along with others, said we needed to do what we did. Now, the gentleman voted against it, but it has, I tell you, worked demonstrably. 2 million new jobs, according to CBO, either not new jobs, retained or created. In fact, over 2 million jobs. 162,000 jobs created last month. Not enough. He is correct. But to ignore the fact that we are making some progress, I don't know whether you saw Larry Kudlow. He said, stop talking down the economy. Stop saying that things aren't getting better, because the psychology of the economy is very important. And in fact, whether it's the stock market indication going up, they have confidence. Whether it's the growth in our economy from a 6.4% decline in the economy that we took over from the Bush administration to now a 5.6% growth. That figure doesn't mean anything to anybody unless they get jobs. I understand that. We need to get jobs. What it does mean, however, with the economy growing, that jobs will follow, and that's important. So please don't put words in my mouth. We need to cut taxes for the American public. In fact, as you know, I want to remark on something that you said. Ronald Reagan was a supporter of the Earned Income Tax Credit. Why was he a supporter of the Earned Income Tax Credit? Because he thought making sure people had enough money to get by on, buy some food for their family, buy some clothes for their kids to go to school, and pay their mortgage payment was an important thing to happen. That's the difference, right? We don't believe that was a handout. It was a hand up. In a very difficult economy, we said, and they don't pay taxes. Why don't they pay taxes? I asked my friend rhetorically. The reason they don't pay taxes is they're not making enough money to pay taxes. Under your tax program, I would suggest to you, you did that. We supported it. They didn't pay taxes, but what we said is they've got to live. Their kids have to eat. They have to get by, and to the extent that they have some assistance in doing so and spend that money, as every economist will tell you, and you know this to be the case, it will help the economy grow. Yes, we help those people as well. Maybe you think that was simply a handout and that we shouldn't have done it, but we did it, and it is the difference between our parties in many instances.
Madam Speaker, I reclaim my time. Madam Speaker, now see, this is when the politics of attack kick in. For anyone to sit here and say that Republicans don't care about people, that's just not true, and he knows it. It's a definitional question. If the gentleman differs with my characterization, it's not a handout, it's a hand up, okay. But what we were talking about was tax relief. It was not a tax cut. If you don't pay taxes, you can't get a tax cut. But what I'd say to the gentleman is this. Times are different right now, Madam Speaker. The American public understands the crossroads this country is at, that we are on a path to fiscal ruin. And the gentleman likes to continue to defend the stimulus bill as having been a success. Well, I would say to the Speaker, Madam Speaker, to the gentleman, not very many people in America think the stimulus bill was a success at generating jobs. And that's just almost a unanimous fact among most Americans. So if we know that, why would we continue to advocate the same policies? And instead, Madam Speaker, I would say again, I hope the gentleman would join us in advocating tax cuts for small businesses so that we can grow jobs in this economy. The gentleman did ask what tax cuts or what tax hikes occurred over this session and during the gentleman's party's majority rule. We know that there was a $65 billion tax increase on tobacco products. There was a almost $7 billion tax increase under the stimulus law, repealing guidance allowing certain payers to claim losses of an acquired corporation. There was another almost $23 billion of surtaxes extended for the federal unemployment program. And there was also, Madam Speaker, as the gentleman knows, a delay of rules reducing double taxation of American foreign nationals to the tune of almost $6 billion. Those are the tax hikes that have occurred in addition to the overwhelming billions and billions of dollars inside the health care bill. So, Madam Speaker, it is not accurate for the gentleman to represent that, number one, this Congress has not raised taxes on the middle class. We know differently. And number two, to sit here and hide behind the notion that there aren't going to be tax increases at the end of this year, and the fact that that realization is not impacting job growth or the lack thereof. Now, that's not being completely accurate, Madam Speaker, and I would say to the gentleman, times are different now. It is time for us to own up to the obligations that we face as a country and work together to try and put this country back onto a growth path. So with that, Madam Speaker.
Will my friend yield one more time?
I yield.
It is a new time. We're paying our bills. Now, we had to borrow a lot of money because we were in a very deep hole. And everybody said if you didn't, all economists, Marty Feldstein, conservative advisor to Ronald Reagan, said you need to put more money back in the economy. We didn't have any money. You had a $5.6 trillion surplus that you inherited. We inherited a $5 trillion deficit. So we had no money. Your administration spent it all. But you didn't pay for things you bought. You didn't pay for your tax cuts. Very nice to give tax cuts. But if you don't pay for them and they create deficits, then who's going to pay for them? Our children. And that's what happened. We went to war. One was absolutely essential. We went to another war that some say was of choice. That is in Iraq. We somewhat abandoned Afghanistan and we went to Iraq, and we didn't succeed in Afghanistan. Well, we didn't pay for either one of those wars. Who were we expecting to pay for those wars? Our children. You adopted a drug prescription program, which very frankly, we made better in the health care bill. We made seniors more secure in getting their prescription drugs. But you didn't pay for it. Your economy that you left us, very frankly, is responsible for 38% of that deficit to which you referred. 90% plus of the deficit that confronts this country are direct results of the policies pursued in the last administration. Just as when Roosevelt inherited from the Hoover administration a very substantial downturn, it took him time to turn this economy around, turn that economy around. So I say to my friend, we are prepared to work together, but we're not prepared to pretend that when you say times are different, they are different. They are very different. The difference between a $5.6 trillion surplus and a $5 trillion deficit. The Bush administration inheritance and our inheritance. And that has made it tough. It's made it tough on us, tough on the American people. And we're trying to get out of this. I think we are. And again, I repeat to my friend, Larry Kudlow gave you some good advice. Very conservative guy on television. You know him. I know him. We appear on his program. And he urged those of you on the conservative side of the ledger, don't deny the facts. That's what Larry Kudlow said. Don't deny the progress that has been made. Because if you deny it, and people believe that denial, they won't think things are getting better, and they won't act accordingly. And that's not going to be good for our economy. It won't be good for our country. So I caution my friend to, when things are positive, have the ability to say, yes, we've made some positive progress from where we were before this administration came into office. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman, and in trying to close this colloquy, Madam Speaker, I would say the gentleman knows good and well that when we had a positive job growth report last month, I was the first one to speak out and acknowledge the fact that, yes, growing jobs is a good thing. We got a long way to go. The gentleman admits that we are at a different time now, and he points to the deficits. And he points to the fact that the old administration, he alleges, didn't pay its bills, and that perhaps we in the majority spent too much. Okay, fine. But it doesn't give this majority and this Congress and this administration any better or more license to go and bankrupt this country by continuing on the spending path. And that is my point. We are at a crossroads, Madam Speaker. I would tell to the gentleman. We have tremendous challenges before us. And as the American people know, if we don't stop the reckless policies of this town, it may very well lead to the fact that our kids and their kids will not enjoy the same freedoms and opportunities that we do. So I continue to tell the gentleman we stand ready to work with him to try and address this extremely critical time in our nation.
The gentleman will yield. I'll simply say I agree with the gentleman. And I agree with the gentleman and certainly want to join together this effort. And the gentleman will observe that's why we have readopted statutory pay-go. We think that will constrain spending. That's why we've created a commission to look at spending and make recommendations to get a handle on the spending in this country and bring our deficit in line as it was in the 90s. And that is why the President has submitted a budget that freezes discretionary spending at last year's levels. So we agree with you that we need to move in that direction, and in fact we are. I thank the gentleman.
I'd say in final closing, Madam Speaker, I'd say that in order to get a handle on spending, just stop. And that is why we shouldn't allow for discussion of hiking taxes. It allows this body, this federal government, to have yet even more of the taxpayer dollars to decide how to spend. It's time for us to stop and practice fiscal discipline and get this economy back on track. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back.
Madam Speaker?
Gentleman from Maryland.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that when the House adjourns today, it adjourn to meet at 12:30 p.m. on Monday next for morning hour debate.
Objection.